focus on our second flavor where we use JavaScript to send the request. All right. And once we have the form set up out of the way, now let's take a look at the JavaScript option. Before we do, though, there's one more thing that I would like to mention. If you take a look at the headers, you'll notice something interesting where we have a content type for the request header. And of course, this is going to be application. And then we have this form URL encoded. And the reason why I'm showing that, because of course, for JavaScript, it is going to be a bit different. So just keep this one for your reference. Now, let's navigate back to our static files, basically to our front end. And now let's take a look at the JavaScript approach. And interestingly here, where I have the JavaScript, I do have the form. Keep in mind, we'll still handle this form, but in this case, it's going to be done strictly using JavaScript. And we'll use JavaScript to send our HTTP requests. And that is very, very crucial. That is going to be the difference where instead of form, now I'll be sending that request using JavaScript. And of course, the content type will be different. That's why I showed you the form example. But what you'll also notice that right away, we have our list. And if you don't believe me, you can double check in data. We have John, Peter, Susan, Anna, and Emma. So what's happening? Well, let's go to JavaScript HTML. This is where we have our front-end logic. And again, let's take a look at our index HTML. A little bit of CSS, nav, and then we have the form. Now, in this case, I don't have the action, and I don't have the method. Okay, interesting. So I have name attribute. It still has a value of name, so I should expect probably that this is going to be the value that's coming in with my request. Then I have a little bit of form alert. This is where we'll display a little bit of functionality as well as the result. Now, if you're not familiar, there's a package called Axios, which essentially just makes it easier to set up HTTP requests. So instead of using the built-in fetch, which I could have used, I think Axios provides a cleaner API and better error messages. And since I don't want to spend 3 hours on explaining all of this code, I simply went with Axios. And the way I set it up, I just set up the CDN link. So this just gets me the Axios library. And then the moment I install it, of course, I have Axios in my front-end project. Please keep that in mind. Those are two separate things. This is a front-end project. And in order not to confuse you more, I just set up few script tags instead of going with a separate JavaScript file. So as you can see here, I'm selecting the result. So that is my div. And I have this fetch people. So that is the function that fetches people from my server. Now notice the path. It is API and people. Why? Well, because in my server, I have also API people. So this is for GET requests. That's the default one. However, in this case, we're not doing that with a browser. We're doing with JavaScript. So Axios has the method by the name of surprise, surprise, get. That just means that on the front end, we're performing a GET request to the same server. That's why we go / API and then people. So make sure these URLs match. So if these paths won't match, then you'll have an error. And to showcase that, if I go with peoples, then if you navigate to the front end and if you refresh, can't fetch data. So we try to fetch people from our server. Then we do a little bit of logic. Again, this is just vanilla JS. I'm not going to cover it. Basically, we iterate over and then we just set up a nice heading 5s and all that. And then we invoke the function. But if there is an error, we'll look for the error property. Now, in this case, I'm not destructuring it. I'm actually not using it. I just say can't fetch data. So that's step number one. Now, the second one is, of course, using the form. So then I select the submit button. I select the form. I also select the alert because we will display an alert if the value is empty. And again, let me repeat, I'm fully aware that we can check for that in the front end. I just wanted to showcase the server setup. And then notice something interesting where I have this try and catch block in my functionality. So the moment the user is submitting the form, of course, I invoke my callback function. It is async because for the Axios, I can wait for the response. And notice this one. So I have Axios, and again, surprise, surprise. The method name is post. Why? Because we are sending a post request. And this is just an Axios thing, but again, we provide the value. In this case, the URL value is API and people. So something that we're not handling yet on our server. And this is the value. So again, this is just Axios syntax where in order to set up whatever data you're sending, you just pass it as a second argument and you set it up as a key value pair. Now, what's really cool that with Axios, they set up all the content types and all that good stuff for you. So again, you just save a little bit of time. Now, if there is an error, in our case, that is going to be if we're trying to submit something. And in fact, there's no value, meaning we just try to submit empty form value, then we will display the error message. And again, this is really cool because Axios just provides a very useful error API, unlike the fetch, where you really need to jump through the hoops. So let me save it back to people so we can see, of course, all the people that we have in our array currently. And then, of course, we'll focus on this post one. So as you can see, I get the input value and I just passed it in as a name property. Awesome. So now back in our app.js, of course, we need to handle it. And please keep in mind one thing where app.post and then API and people is not the same as API get and API people. Even though the URL is the same, methods are different. And that goes for all the methods we're going to use, whether you're talking about put, delete, or whatever. So just because the URLs are the same doesn't mean that they mean the same thing. No, the method is different. Here, I'm just reading the data. I'm reading data from API people. Here, I'm actually trying to add data. And again, we're going to go with rec and res. And let's just go with some simple response. Now, for time being, I'm just going to say that my response is going to be 201. Now, that's the response that we send back if we are performing a post request and we're successful. So I'll just say res.status 201. And for time being, let's just say send. And I'm just going to say success. And of course, now what I would want is to navigate back to my JavaScript one. I'll refresh. I'm getting all my people. And now let's try it out. So I'm going to send this one. So I sent, again, here nothing changed. But if I take a look at my network tab, I should see, and by the way, sorry, I'll have to do that one more time. Let's go with, I don't know, Susan here. Let's try to submit. And there it is. Now, of course, I have API people and 201. So that's the response that I'm getting on my front end. So let's bravely click on this one. And we can see that the request URL is API people. Okay. The method was post. Now the response was 201. So it was successfully created. And now check it out. When we look at the request headers, of course, we have application JSON. So on our front end, we do need to add this content type when we are sending the data. Now, again, what's really cool about Axios, it adds for us, but in general, you need to keep that in mind. And there it is. Again, we have this request payload and the name is equal to Susan. So whatever I'm going to pass it in, if I'm going to send it empty, then I'm going to still have the key name and the value will be empty. Now, the gotcha here is even though we're handling a form submissions, we're not handling the JSON data. So yes, we know how we can send back the JSON data, but we're not handling the incoming JSON data. And this is where another middleware comes into play. So I'm going to say parse JSON here. And we simply need to go again with app.use, and we go with express and JSON. Now, in this case, I'm not going to go to documentation. If you want, you can do that. In my case, I will try to save us a little bit of time, and we'll skip that. And here we have API people. And now, similarly to our login, we have access to the form data that is being sent with JavaScript in the rec.body. Previously, before this was added, no, we have no access. Yes, when it comes to form, that was one setup. Now, when it comes to straight up HTTP requests, for example, in this case, sent with JavaScript, no, we had no access. So we were getting a JSON, and now we added a specific middleware that handles that. So, of course, in this case now, we can set up more logic, correct? We can say that we're looking for the name, and if the name is provided, then awesome. Then I'm going to send back that new person that was created so we can add it to our front end. And again, this is the case where we're not persisting this data anywhere. Later, we will learn how to do that. For now, I already have the code that adds it to our front end. However, if the user tries to submit without any values, well, then there's going to be a error message. So in the API people, in the post method, let's set up our logic where I'm going to go with const name is equal to rec.body. The middleware makes it possible now. And then I'm going to say if the name is not provided, well, then I'm going to send back the 400. Then I'm going to say, please provide name value. So there's going to be a error message. So I'll say here, if an exclamation point, and if the name is not provided, then let's go to return res dot status. And for the request error, we go with 400. That's the status code. And then let's go again with JSON. And in this case, we're going to go with success. Now this success will be false. And then we're going to go with message. Again, I would suggest using the same properties because, of course, I'm handling them on the front end as well. So in here, I'll say, please provide name value, like so. Now, if the value is provided, whatever it is, then, of course, we can send back res.status 201. Hey, guys, it's John from the future with a small update. As you'll see in a second, while I was recording, I forgot to change the methods. So instead of writing JSON, I just left it as send. And while we can get away with it in this example, normally you always want to use JSON instead. So make sure you change your method from send to JSON. And in this case, let's just set up a proper object. We'll say success is true. So now we're being successful. And I'm just going to send back that person. Now I'm going to set it up with person key. And the value will be name, whatever I'm getting. Again, please use the same ones if you want to have a same result. Now, let's navigate back. We can refresh just so we are all on the same page. And if we type Susan now, we should see another Susan added to our list. And then again, we can go with John. And I'm just being lazy on coming up with original names. And as you can see, every time we add value in our form, we're being successful. We're actually getting back this value from our server, and then we dynamically add it to our front end. And again, the reason why we're doing it this way is because we're not persisting this data. So that's why the setup is following. Later, of course, we'll learn how to persist this in a database as well. And if I try to submit with empty value, check it out. Now, of course, I have people. And this one is what? 400, right? Notice here. And it says, please provide name value. Now, if you want to do a bit of console logging, you're welcome to do that on the front end. If, for example, you're iffy about the syntax, but just to let you know, when we talk about Axios here, effectively, we're getting back the whole thing. So when we perform a request, HTTP request with Axios, we're actually getting back a giant object. Now, what we're interested in that object is a data property. So that's the response that is coming back from the server. And then in here, as you can see, I set up a heading 5 with data.person. So that's the person that we're sending back from our server. Now, if, for example, there is an error, we go with error response, again, data property, because that's where the useful information sits. Because the object, of course, is giant with lots of useful information. But as far as what we're sending back, it is sitting in the data, and then message. Now, why I'm looking for the message property? Of course, here, because I set up a message property on the server. Hopefully it is clear. This is our second flavor where effectively we perform a post request from the application. And of course, in that case, we do need to provide content type as well as the data. And next video, we'll install and cover some basic setup for a very useful tool that is going to save us a lot of trouble when we work with post, delete, as well as put methods. All right. So at this point, we're familiar with two ways how we can send a post request. So we covered how we can do that using the form as well as straight up HTTP request, in our case, using JavaScript. However, there's a major problem in our current setup, and the problem is following. If we need to create a front end to test something for every route, as you can see, I mean, our development is going to be extremely slow because we can clearly see that it's probably going to take us way longer just to set up a front end than setting up just one simple route. So every time I create a route, I'm probably going to spend, I don't know, 5-6 times more on setting up the front end where I can test this route. And of course, there has to be a better option, and that better option is a tool called Postman. And Postman is just awesome for quickly testing our APIs. So at this point, I strongly suggest that you navigate to postman.com. Again, it's a free tool, so you're not going to have to pay anything. But for the remainder of the course, yes, we'll use this. So if you're kind of iffy about installing something new, this is something that is required. So navigate to postman.com, and then they'll try to sign you up. You don't have to do that. Just keep scrolling down, and all the way in the bottom, you'll see this download app option. Go here, and they'll right away detect which operating system you're using. Of course, in my case, that is Mac. So download the application. Once it's on my computer, I'm going to navigate back to the desktop. I'm going to go to downloads. I'll crack it open. Then, of course, I'll just move it to my applications like so. Now, I already had one on my computer, but I removed it so we can do these steps together. Then this is the application. Let me zoom in. That's the Postman. So just click on it, and then it's going to spin up the app. And eventually, you'll hit the dashboard. And I'm not going to spend half an hour on the setup. But of course, as we're progressing with the course, as we're progressing with our examples, we will cover more features that this app provides. And basically here, you'll have all your requests that you can actually group in collections. And again, that's something that we'll cover a bit later. And this is where we can make those requests. And in order to create a new request, we just click on this plus sign and check it out. So at the moment, I have untitled request. In here, I need to enter the URL, and I can send my request. Now notice here on the left-hand side, what do I have? I have get. But what's really cool, I have all these methods available as well. So first, let's test out the get route, and then we'll see how we can deal with post route as well. Now, as far as our URL, what it is, well, it is localhost 5000. And of course, the full URL is API and people. Now, this is for the post as well as the get. And since we're testing get, of course, that's why we have a method with the value of get. So let's go here, local host, and then 5000, then / API and people. And the moment I click send, check it out. What do I see here in the bottom? I see my object, the success value is true, and there I have my data. So as you can see, the moment I create my route, for example, post route or put route or whatever, I can test it immediately. I can test it within a few seconds instead of building the whole front end just so I can test one route. And of course, once we have covered get route, now let's see how we can deal with a post route. So we need to change the method, of course. Now the URL still stays the same because I do have a route for the post, as you can see. And in here, what I'm looking for the name in the body. And how do we construct a post request in a Postman? Well, we do that in a following way. First, we go to the body and we look for raw. And instead of text, I go with JSON because I'm going to be sending a JSON data. So this is not the case where we're working with the forms. In this case, we're sending a JSON data. And what you'll notice, something really interesting, in the headers right away, there's going to be a content type. So let's see. Let's set up first the body and you'll see how it gets added. So we're going to go here with a name. Again, this is what I'm looking for. That's why I need to pass it. And then I'm going to set up some kind of value. Now, since I'm setting up the JSON, please remember that we need to use double quotation marks. So I'm going to go here with John. And if you paid attention, previously we had 8 headers and now we have 9. So I'm going to go back and there it is. Now I have content type application JSON. So that's really cool. We don't have to do anything. The header gets added for us. And now, of course, the moment I click send, check it out. Now I have success true and person John. Why do I have that? Well, because that is my response. I have success true. And of course, whatever name I received, I just send it back. So now, of course, let's quickly test out our 400 as well. So I'm going to navigate back and then in the body, I'm just going to send a empty string, or you can remove name altogether. That's really up to you. And now, of course, I have 400 bad requests and the success is false. And of course, I can see the message. So as you can see, we can test it within seconds. And to really hammer this home, why don't we create another post route and quickly set up some kind of response? And let's test it out in our Postman as well. So I'm going to go in between the post and login. I'm just going to go with app.post and the route is going to be following. I'm going to go with path of API, people, and I'm going to add a Postman here. Or you know what, let's do it this way. Let's go Postman and then people, like so. And then as far as the callback function, again, we get rec, res, and then in the body, again, I'm going to be looking for the name property. So I want to get that name. So I'm going to say that I'm expecting it. We'll go with name, rec, dot body. Again, if you want to console log the body, you can do so. But I think we have done that quite a few times. So I'm going to omit that. Then I'll copy and paste my error response. So again, if the name is not provided, meaning if the property is not there or if it's just empty, I'm sending back the 400. However, if I'm successful, then I'm just going to take my array. I'll add that extra person and I'll send it back. Now I'm not going to add the ID. I'll leave that one blank because eventually database will do that for us. So I don't really see the point of doing that manually. So I'm going to go back to my API Postman people. And then again, this is my error response. And now let's copy and paste our status. And then instead of sending that one person we created, why don't we do this? Why don't we go with data? And then, of course, the array name is people. And now, as you can see, I'm using the spread operator. And I'm just going to add that one single person. So I'll save. Now, of course, we do need to change the route. So it's not going to be API. It's going to be Postman and then people, like so. Now let's add, for example, Peter. And then the moment I click send, there it is. I have my success true. And as far as data, all the way somewhere should be Peter as well. So again, we just grab